What if the only thing standing between a lost 3-year-old and the deadly Colorado wilderness was the loyalty of a forgotten German shepherd? Why do some of us survive against all odds? And what would you risk to save an innocent life? This is not just a rescue story. It's about the moments that force us to choose compassion over fear and hope over despair. It was the sort of Colorado afternoon that looked picture-perfect on a postcard. Sharp winter sunlight dazzling off fresh snow, mountains casting long blue shadows, and the air so crisp it stung the nose. But for 3-year-old Emily Grace, nicknamed Emmy, that day would etch itself in frost and fear forever. They'd stopped at a lonely mountain rest area halfway between nowhere and somewhere. A battered blue SUV idling as the last notes of a country song faded from the radio. Her father, Brandon Grace, looked hollow behind the wheel, hollowed out by months of grief and the quiet, gnawing sickness that he tried to drown with cheap whiskey and regret. Brandon's hands trembled as he stared at the old family photo taped to the dashboard. Emily, her mother, and himself, before everything changed. Emmy, bundled in a too big pink parka, watched snowflakes twirl in the wind. She clutched her battered blue blanket in one hand, her other arm wrapped tightly around her stuffed bunny, Mr. Whiskers. The world felt enormous, beautiful, and a little scary. She didn't understand why her dad was crying. She didn't know he'd been driving for hours without sleep, haunted by nightmares of his late wife and overwhelmed by the responsibilities he was sure he couldn't carry. The fight started with a whispered argument, Brandon cursing himself, pounding the steering wheel. He stumbled out of the car, barely noticing Emmy's small voice behind him. "Daddy?" Her voice quivered, but he was lost, pacing circles in the icy lot. Something inside him snapped. He couldn't take it anymore. The weight, the memories, the fear he'd fail his daughter just as he'd failed his wife. A minute, maybe 2, and Brandon was gone. Sliding behind the wheel, slamming the door, peeling out into the snow, not even glancing back. He didn't realize Emmy had followed him out, nor that she was now standing alone at the edge of the empty rest area, wide-eyed as taillights vanished between the trees. The silence hit Emmy like a slap. She blinked, fighting tears, her cheeks flushed with cold. The snow was falling harder now, erasing tracks, swallowing up the last warmth of the afternoon. Her mittens, blue with white stars, slipped from her tiny hands as she shuffled after the car, calling out in the uncertain language of a child who believes, against all reason, that parents always come back. But Brandon did not come back, and Emmy was alone. Confused and scared, Emmy wandered the rest area, calling for her father. She circled the empty picnic tables, staring up at a sky growing heavier and grayer. Her breath came out in quick white puffs as panic edged into her voice. The loneliness was vast, and every sound, the wind in the pines, the distant cry of a bird, seemed amplified in the growing gloom. She clung harder to her blanket and toy bunny, looking for something familiar, something safe. She didn't know how to find the road. All she saw were snowbanks taller than she was, and thick woods pressing in from every side. When Emmy stumbled near the edge of the paved lot, her boot slipped on a patch of black ice. She tumbled hard, knees scraping across frozen gravel. A bright line of blood blossomed on her tights, hot and shocking against the cold, a pain she didn't understand but couldn't ignore. She whimpered, clutching her knee, tears streaking down her pink cheeks. She sat there for a long time, crying into her blue blanket. The pain faded, replaced by a deeper, colder fear. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know how to go home. She didn't understand that her small trail of blood would later become a lifeline for strangers desperate to find her. The daylight began to bleed away, the mountains turning purple and shadowed. Emmy, shivering, dragged herself up. Driven by the child's faith that someone would come if she just kept moving, she shuffled into the trees, guided by nothing but fear and the instinct to find warmth. She left behind more than just her blood. At the edge of a low branch, her mitten caught and held, snagged on a splinter. She tugged and twisted, but the mitten refused to come free. Frustrated, she finally let go, watching the wind catch the soft wool and set it fluttering like a flag, an unspoken message for anyone who might care to look. The temperature dropped. The woods felt alive with secret eyes, every shadow a new danger. The snow thickened, muffling Emmy's cries as she wandered deeper into the wild. The world grew stranger and colder, her tiny form shrinking against the vastness of the night, and somewhere in the darkness, a pair of golden eyes flickered open. A guardian, battered and forgotten, but not yet ready to give up on the world. This was how a 3-year-old and an old dog began the journey that would test the limits of love, loyalty, and survival. But for now, Emmy was only a lost child in a vast, indifferent wilderness, her hope hanging by a thread, and a mitten fluttering in the wind. The sun slipped behind the peaks, spilling lavender and charcoal across the snowy Colorado woods. Cold seeped into every crevice, settling in like a silent predator. Wind skittered along the treetops and whistled through the empty rest area, carrying with it the faintest sound, a child's thin, frightened sobbing. Most creatures would have ignored it, but not Max. Once he'd been a hero, a proud German shepherd with a badge clipped to his collar and a job that mattered. He'd tracked missing hikers, sniffed out avalanche survivors, pulled children from riverbanks swollen with spring melt. But time had stolen his youth and purpose. His right hip ached with every step. His left ear was ragged from a fight with a coyote the previous spring. No one remembered his name now. His handler was long gone. These days, Max wandered the edges of civilization. Dumpsters behind mountain diners, shadows under picnic tables, scraps from kind strangers when he was lucky. Most saw only a limping stray with graying muzzle, eyes too wise for a dog. But under the dirt and old scars, the heart of a rescuer still beat. That's why, when the wind carried the desperate sound of a child's cry, Max lifted his head and listened. He cocked his battered ear, nose twitching, muscles tensing with a surge of forgotten purpose. The scent of blood, sharp and metallic, mingled with the familiar smells of fear and cold. He stood, favoring his stiff leg, and followed the scent trail, paw prints silent in the thickening snow. The night pressed close. Emmy, lost and exhausted, huddled beneath a crooked pine, clutching her blanket and Mr. Whiskers, cheeks sticky with dried tears. Her scraped knee throbbed, but she was too tired to cry anymore. All she wanted was her dad, her mom, a warm place, anything but this growing, gnawing emptiness. Branches snapped in the darkness. Emmy froze, holding her breath. A shadow moved between the trees, a big, dark shape, eyes glinting amber in the moonlight. She pressed her bunny tighter to her chest and whimpered. For one terrifying moment, she thought it was a wolf, come to eat her up. But the animal drew closer and stopped, nose quivering, tail held low and cautious. Max had seen plenty of children, but never one so small and alone in such a terrible place. He watched Emmy quietly, gauging her fear. She hiccuped, wiped her nose on her sleeve, and whispered, "Doggy." It was more hope than question. Max inched closer, his body low to the ground, ears back, tail swishing slowly. He didn't want to scare her, but he needed to know she was okay. Emmy sniffled, then reached out a mittenless hand. Max stretched his neck and gently sniffed her fingers. He caught the scent of blood and salt, old tears and crushed crackers. Slowly, Emmy pressed her cheek to his fur and sobbed into his ruff. The dog's warmth seeped through her coat. For the first time since she'd been left behind, she felt a flicker of hope. Max curled his large body around her, shielding her from the wind. She buried her face in his neck, letting the steady thump of his heart calm her. The snow kept falling. Emmy's eyelids drooped, heavy with exhaustion, but she fought to stay awake. She was dimly aware of Max licking her scraped knee, cleaning the blood in a way both gentle and matter-of-fact. Night deepened. The sounds of the forest changed. Owls hooted. Something rustled in the brush. The world contracted to the circle of warmth between girl and dog. Emmy dozed, shivering. Then startled awake to Max's deep guttural growl. She peered out from under his paw and saw shapes moving at the edge of the trees. Thin, slinking bodies, eyes shining like green coals. Coyotes. The pack circled, hungry and emboldened by the storm. Max bared his teeth and barked, an explosion of sound that sent Emmy scrambling back, her heart thumping so hard she thought it might break. The coyotes whined, tails tucked, but they did not flee. One darted forward, jaws snapping at Max's flank. He lunged, driving it back, teeth flashing white. The leader snarled, lunging in from the side. Max turned and clamped down on its shoulder, refusing to let go even as sharp teeth raked his leg. Emmy screamed, covering her ears. The night was chaos, snarling, snow flying, Max fighting with the wild strength of a dog who remembers what it means to protect. At last, the pack broke. The coyotes, wounded and spooked by the old dog's fury, melted into the darkness. Max limped back to Emmy, sides heaving, blood oozing from a bite on his hind leg. He nudged her with his nose, whining softly, then collapsed beside her. Emmy hugged him with all her strength, sobbing into his fur. She didn't notice the blood on her hands, or the way Max's breathing came rough and shallow. All she knew was that she wasn't alone anymore. In the vast, frozen world, a battered dog had chosen her. Side by side they faced the night, a lost child and a lost dog, bound together by fear, hope, and a flicker of something more. As the snow drifted higher around them and the cold bit deeper, Emmy and Max clung to each other, two souls against the darkness. The world might have forgotten them, but for tonight, they would not forget each other. The night passed slow and silent, danger lurking in every shadow. But the old shepherd stood guard, daring the wilderness to try again. The promise of morning glimmered somewhere far away. For now, the only light was the courage in Max's heart, and the trust growing in Emmy's small, shaking hands. Dawn crept slow and gray through the tangled pine and aspen, brushing the snow with a pale silver light. For a moment, the world looked soft and gentle, each branch heavy with new powder. But cold still gnawed at every shadow, and hunger was a restless ache in both girl and dog. Emmy stirred first, huddled in her cocoon of blue blanket and fur, her cheeks red from wind and weeping. She blinked groggily, unsure whether the previous night was real or just a bad dream, but the warmth at her side and the ache in her scraped knee reminded her this was no dream at all. Max raised his head, ears flicking at the soft crunch of her movement. He licked her cheek once, then turned his attention to her injury, gently cleaning the dried blood from her knee with slow, careful strokes. Emmy whimpered, but this time it was less from pain than surprise. She touched his head with trembling fingers, her faith in this gentle old dog deepening with each beat of her tiny heart. The morning was cruel, colder than the night. Max knew they couldn't stay exposed. He remembered the stories of lost hikers frozen beneath trees, of search parties finding only silence. He nudged Emmy to her feet, his body stiff with pain from the coyote's bite. He would not let her see his limp, nor the blood that had dried on his hind leg. Protecting her was all that mattered now. "Doggy, where's Daddy?" Emmy asked, voice hoarse. But Max could only whine and lick her hand, urging her to rise. She clung to his thick fur, struggling to stand, her legs wobbling as if she'd forgotten how to walk. The ground was slick, the snow deep for someone so small. Emmy wrapped her blanket around her shoulders and leaned into Max's warmth, trusting him to guide her somewhere safe. Every step was a journey. Emmy left behind a faint trail, small boot prints, tufts of blue fiber from her blanket snagged on brambles, and the tiniest drops of blood where her knee reopened. Max moved ahead slowly, stopping every few yards to make sure she followed. He sniffed the air, searching for shelter, for the faintest scent of food, for anything that might help them last just a little longer. Somewhere behind them, the blue ribbon slipped from Emmy's tangled hair and fluttered down onto the snowy path. It snagged on a thorn bush, waving gently in the breeze, a small but vital clue that would mean everything to those searching later. The woods seemed endless and alive, every sound amplified by the hush of new snow. Max led Emmy beneath a thicket of low branches, and she gasped as a flurry of birds erupted into the sky. Her stomach growled. She remembered the peanut butter crackers in her dad's car, now impossibly far away. The world smelled sharp and strange, like pine sap and frozen earth, with an undertone of animal musk that sent chills up her spine. As they trudged on, Emmy's energy faded. Her breaths came in little puffs. Her mittenless hand grew red and numb. Several times she stumbled and nearly fell, but Max nudged her upright with his snout, never letting her rest too long in one spot. When she sobbed from exhaustion, he sat beside her, offering his body as a pillow, sharing his own fading heat. Time lost all meaning. The sun hung low and pale, barely warming the forest floor. Emmy thought she saw shapes moving in the shadows, maybe more coyotes, maybe something worse. Once a deer darted across their path, all slender legs and white tail, vanishing like a ghost. Emmy's heart leaped in fear and awe, but Max paid the deer no mind. He kept moving, his nose to the ground, tracking some memory of safety. After what felt like hours, Max stopped in front of a fallen tree, a massive old log, hollowed by rot and time. He sniffed inside, circling twice before backing out and giving a soft, encouraging woof. Emmy hesitated, but curiosity overcame her fear. She crawled in after him, dragging her blanket and bunny. The log was cramped but dry inside, lined with old leaves and bits of fur left by some other animal now long gone. It was the closest thing to a home they could find. Max curled his body around Emmy in the hollow, sheltering her from the wind. She tucked her frozen toes under his belly and closed her eyes. The log muffled the outside noises, the creaking branches, the distant howl of a wolf, the wind's constant moan. For a while they simply breathed together, the girl's shivers slowly fading as the dog's warmth seeped into her bones. Emmy drifted in and out of a restless sleep, dreaming of her mother's voice and the scent of fresh-baked bread. Sometimes she would wake, startled, and Max would be there, licking her face or pawing gently at her side to keep her from slipping too far away. It was in these silent moments, pressed close in the darkness of the old log, that the bond between child and dog became something unbreakable. They didn't share a language, but their hearts spoke in fear and hope, in pain and stubborn love. Max had found someone to protect, Emmy someone to trust. For now, it was enough. As the day wore on, Max listened for danger, every muscle taut and ready. But all he heard was the wind and Emmy's quiet breathing. He licked her face one last time, then settled his chin across her legs, closing his eyes but never truly sleeping. The day outside slipped toward dusk, and snow began to fall again, soft and steady, erasing all tracks. But inside the hollow, two survivors huddled close, their tiny flame of hope burning against the dark. Unbeknownst to them, miles away, searchers were already combing the mountainside, following the clues Emmy had left behind. A mitten, a drop of blood, a blue ribbon snagged in the snow. But for Emmy and Max, rescue was still just a distant dream. For now, they had each other, a hollow log, and the fierce determination to take one more step together. In the sheriff's office at the edge of the mountain town, the atmosphere crackled with urgency and dread. Deputy Rachel Bennett gripped the radio so tightly her knuckles went white. Her mind spun with logistics. How many hours had the child been missing? How far could a 3-year-old wander? How much time was left before cold and hunger became deadly? The dispatcher's voice cut through the static, updates from volunteers crackling in her ear. Rachel's jaw clenched. Every second lost was a blow. Rachel wasn't just a search leader. She was a mother. Years ago, she'd nearly lost her own son to a drowning accident. That memory was a shadow always at her shoulder. Every missing child brought it rushing back, the paralyzing fear, the moments ticking by like thunder. Now she poured every bit of that terror into fuel for the search. She wouldn't let this girl vanish into the Colorado wild, not on her watch. Outside, the sky was bruised and low, spitting intermittent flakes. Flashing lights from squad cars and rescue vehicles painted the parking lot blue and red. Rachel moved through the organized chaos. Teams bundling up in parkas, dogs barking from the K-9 units, a chopper readying for one last sweep before the weather closed in. She scanned the map taped to the hood of her cruiser, tracing possible routes a small child might take, desperate for a pattern. A volunteer jogged up, breath clouding in the cold. "Deputy Bennett, we found something!" Rachel's heart jumped as she hurried over. In the palm of a searcher's glove lay a child's mitten, blue with white stars, damp and frayed at the edge. "It matches the description," he said. Rachel nodded, fighting to keep her composure. "Flag this location. Let's expand the grid. Everyone, keep your eyes open for more." The radio chirped again. Another clue, further out. A blue ribbon fluttering from a thorn bush, bright against the snow. Rachel's hand went to her own hair almost unconsciously. She remembered tying ribbons in her daughter's hair before school, the trust in those small hands as she did. She forced herself to stay professional. "All units, adjust your sweep. We have a trail. Move quickly, lights fading." As the teams pressed deeper into the woods, the findings grew more alarming. "Deputy, paw prints. Big ones, not coyote." A rookie called out, crouched by a patch of churned-up snow and droplets of dried blood. Rachel knelt beside him, eyes narrowing. German Shepherd, she guessed. Or something close. Her mind raced. Had the girl been attacked? Or was she, by some miracle, not alone? She snapped a photo, marked the spot on her map, and pushed forward, hope and dread battling in her chest. Back at the hollow log, Emmy and Max lay curled together, faintly aware that the world was moving around them. Emmy dreamed fitful dreams, her mother's lullabies, warm kitchens, a hand that brushed her hair. In her sleep, she whispered for her daddy, voice thin as frost. Suddenly, a shadow passed over the log, massive, hulking, all muscle and hunger. Max's ears pricked. He sniffed the air and smelled trouble. Bear. Not just any bear, but an old black male, half-starved from a poor winter, its nose twitching at the sense of blood and fear. Max tensed, his body blocking the hollow's entrance, every instinct screaming to protect. The bear's snout pushed at the log, thick claws raking the bark. Emmy woke with a start, her heart thundering in her chest. She saw only fur and teeth through the crack in the wood, and whimpered. Max growled, low and rumbling, a warning that meant back off in any language. The bear hesitated, then huffed, snuffling for easier prey. With a last swipe of its paw, it lumbered away, leaving deep tracks in the snow. Max waited until all was quiet, then relaxed, but only a little. The world out here was full of threats, and he would not rest easy again. Meanwhile, the searchers fanned out, calling Emmy's name into the wind. Rachel's boots crunched over frozen ground, her breath a rhythm in her ears. She moved with practiced precision, but inside her heart screamed for speed. Each time a searcher radioed in, nothing here, only animal tracks. She felt hope dim. She refused to give in. "We keep going," she told her team. "We don't quit. That child's alive out here. I can feel it." As dusk deepened, searchlights flickered through the trees. The snow made every sound sharper. Shovels scraping, voices echoing, dogs barking as they caught unfamiliar scents. Somewhere far above, a hawk cried out, searching for its own kind of prey. Rachel paused at a small stream, kneeling to look for signs. There, a tuft of blue fiber caught on a branch, another piece of the puzzle. She radioed it in, heart pounding, praying they weren't already too late. Back in the log, Emmy and Max huddled as the cold pressed harder. Emmy pressed her face into Max's fur, too tired to cry. Max licked her forehead, whining softly, as if to say, "Hold on, someone's coming." Emmy listened to his heartbeat, letting it guide her through the fear. Outside, Rachel gathered her team at the last marked clue. The sun was gone, the woods a maze of shadows and cold. She scanned the faces around her, tough ranchers, grizzled firefighters, a few scared teenagers with flashlights, and found resolve. "We go until we can't see, then we go a little farther. That's what I'd want if it were my child out there." Heads nodded. Lights flickered on. The search pressed deeper into the dark. Unseen by all, the bear's tracks crossed with those of the searchers and the paw prints, telling a silent story in the snow. Somewhere in the darkness, a child's life still hung by a thread, and an old dog watched over her with eyes that refused to give up. For Rachel, for Emmy, for Max, the night was far from over, but hope, like the faint blue ribbon in the wind, fluttered on, delicate, determined, impossible to ignore. The mountain air had always been unpredictable, but no one in the rescue party expected the sky to turn so quickly. At first, it was just a subtle thickening of the clouds, a hush falling over the woods as the wind shifted. Deputy Rachel Bennett looked up and felt a cold dread coil in her stomach. Years on, the force had taught her to read these signs, how a blue-gray sky could suddenly collapse into whiteout, how hope could freeze just as fast as a lost child. She pressed her radio to her lips, voice tight. "All units, eyes up. Weather's changing. Mark your last position and check in every 5 minutes. Don't let the snow fool you. We're not stopping." But within minutes, the first flakes began to swirl, gentle as ash, then thick and relentless. The woods became a snow globe, the visibility dropping with every breath. Searchlights from the rescue vehicles faded into glowing orbs in the distance. Boots sank deeper. Radios crackled with static and worried voices. Rachel's fingers stung inside her gloves. Every lost child she'd ever read about, every nightmare of her own son slipping away, pressed into her mind as she pushed through drifts, calling Emmy's name into the wind. Miles away, inside the hollow log, Emmy woke to a world changed. Her cheeks burned with fever, her eyes bleary and confused. Max licked her hand, then her forehead, nose cold and insistent. The log shuddered with each new gust, snow packing into the cracks. Emmy whimpered, clinging to her blue blanket and her bunny, shivering violently. Her body felt so heavy, her mind floating between waking and sleep. "Doggy," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "I'm cold." Max's own pain throbbed from the coyote wound, but he refused to rest. He could sense the blizzard's danger, the way the snow muffled sound, the way even a strong dog could vanish under a drift if they didn't find shelter. He nudged Emmy again, urging her to move. She tried, but her legs wouldn't obey. Her fever spiked, her face flushed and glazed with sweat even as the cold gnawed at her skin. Max whined, pacing in the cramped log, his breath steaming in the bitter air. Through the blinding white, Max's instincts took over. He stuck his nose out of the hollow and sniffed, catching the faintest scent of something human, a mixture of old canvas and dried tobacco, traces left behind by hunters. With Emmy barely awake, Max gently gripped her sleeve in his jaws and tugged. Emmy, half conscious, let herself be guided out into the blizzard, snow instantly caking her boots and hair. They stumbled forward, Max using every memory from years as a rescue dog, fighting the urge to lie down and sleep. He led Emmy through a stand of trees, past a fallen fence, following that thin trail of human scent. The snow whipped around them, relentless, until Max saw a dark shape looming through the white, an old wooden hunter's blind, nearly buried under a drift. He barked, low and urgent, and nudged Emmy toward the entrance. She crawled inside, sobbing with exhaustion, clutching her blanket and bunny so hard her knuckles turned white. Max wriggled in behind her, blocking the wind with his bulk. The blind was cramped and musty, but inside it felt almost warm compared to the fury outside. In the gloom, Emmy's eyes landed on a faded backpack tucked into the corner. With clumsy fingers, she dragged it close and fumbled with the zipper. Max watched, tail thumping weakly in encouragement. Inside, she found treasures: a half-eaten granola bar, stale but sweet, and a tiny bottle of water half frozen. Emmy gnawed at the bar, sharing crumbs with Max, then sipped the icy water. It wasn't enough to chase away the hunger, but it was something. Hope flickered back to life, thin as a candle flame. Nightfall came fast, the world outside sealed in ice and wind. The blizzard screamed against the walls of the blind, rattling every loose board. Emmy pressed herself against Max, her shivers growing violent, fever making her delirious. She whispered for her mother, for warmth, for anything but this endless cold. Max curled around her, licking her face and hands, desperate to keep her awake, to share every drop of his own warmth. Outside, the rescue effort came to a grinding halt. Rachel's team staggered back to base, tears freezing on cheeks, radios nearly useless. Rachel collapsed into the front seat of her cruiser, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, all her training, all her discipline, crumbled beneath the weight of helplessness. She pictured Emmy's face, blue with cold, somewhere in that white hell. "Don't let it end this way," she pleaded, voice cracking. "Please just let me find her in time." In the hunter's blind, Emmy faded in and out of fever dreams. She saw her father's face, tear-stained, afraid, then her mother, smiling and warm, beckoning her home. Max would not let her slip away. All night, he lay beside her, licking her face, nudging her every time her breathing slowed, keeping the darkness at bay with the beating of his heart. The storm howled on, blanketing every clue, erasing every trail. But in that fragile pocket of warmth and courage, a child and a dog survived another night, hope refusing to die beneath the endless snow. When the blizzard finally relented, it was as if the whole mountain had exhaled. The snow ceased its wild, relentless attack, settling over everything in a thick, muffling silence. The sky above the Colorado wilderness glowed a watery blue, clouds retreating just enough to let morning light bleed through. In the rescue command tent, Deputy Rachel Bennett forced herself to keep moving, though she hadn't slept all night. She sipped lukewarm coffee, hands shaking, not from caffeine but from the fear that had haunted every hour since Emmy's disappearance. There was still no sign of the girl, and Rachel's hope had been battered by the storm almost as badly as the search teams themselves. But as dawn broke, determination returned with the daylight. Rachel's radio sparked to life, scratchy but full of urgency. "We're heading out again, ma'am," came a voice from the East search team. "Visibility's back. We'll start at the last marked clues and fan out." Rachel closed her eyes and nodded, drawing strength from that. "Let's bring her home," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Out in the forest, snow glittered on every surface, erasing old tracks and burying yesterday's pain. But even the storm could not conceal everything. As the sun rose, a hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing above the treetops. Below, a volunteer with a sharp eye spotted something bright and blue against the white. Emmy's blanket, caught on a low branch, waving in the gentle breeze. Rachel, leading her team on snowshoes, rushed to the scene. Her heart leapt. This was fresh, dropped since the last sweep, a sign Emmy was still out there, moving, fighting to survive. She knelt in the snow, gloves fumbling with the fabric. She pressed the blanket to her cheek, letting the scent of fabric softener and the faint, innocent smell of childhood remind her why this mattered. Rachel stood, rallying her searchers. "She's close. Keep your eyes open for anything. A toy, a scrap of clothing. She's moving. That means she's alive." Elsewhere, Emmy shivered in the hunter's blind, her small body racked with fever. In her sleep, she whimpered for her mother, for home, for warmth. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks flushed and too warm despite the icy air. Max, ever vigilant, refused to leave her side. He licked her hands, whined softly, and curled as tightly around her as possible, his own wound throbbing but ignored. Each time Emmy stirred, Max responded, nuzzling her back from the edge of unconsciousness. Sometimes, Emmy's feverish mind wandered. She called out for her mother, for her father, her cries weak and desperate. "Mama, Mama, please. I'm cold." But Max was there, a living anchor, his heartbeat steady, his eyes refusing to let her go. She clung to his fur, delirious and shaking, while outside the blind, the world slowly awakened from the storm. Meanwhile, Brandon Grace sat in the back of a patrol car at the edge of the search grid, head in his hands, shoulders shaking with guilt. He'd confessed everything to the police. The drinking, the panic, the moment he realized, too late, that he'd left his daughter behind. Shame weighed on him heavier than the mountain snow. When Rachel arrived, he begged to join the search, tears streaking his weathered face. "I just need to do something. Please, I have to try." Rachel looked into his eyes and saw not a criminal, but a father destroyed by his own failures. She gave a curt nod. "You stay with me. We'll cover the western ridge." As the morning wore on, the searchers spread out across the battered landscape. They scanned trees, crawled through snowbanks, called Emmy's name into the brightening air. One young volunteer spotted a stuffed bunny half buried under a drift. He held it up and shouted, hope cracking in his voice. Rachel hurried over, tears pricking her eyes. Another clue. Another thread in the desperate tapestry of this rescue. Every little sign reminded the team the girl was still fighting. Back in the blind, Emmy's fever broke, leaving her weak but conscious. She blinked up at Max, confusion in her eyes. Her lips trembled. "Doggy, where's Mama?" Max whined, nudged her gently, and licked the salt from her cheek. The hunger gnawed at her stomach. The cold seeped in everywhere, relentless and uncaring, but Emmy found the strength to nibble another crumb from the granola bar, sharing the last bite with Max. Far across the white expanse, Rachel's team pressed on, buoyed by every clue. She pulled Brandon along, forcing him to focus on the search, not the guilt. "Look for color," she coached. "Anything that doesn't belong. That's her story out there, scattered in pieces." Brandon nodded, wiping his eyes, scanning every bush and branch for some sign of his little girl. Then, a shout from the edge of a ravine. "Here, I've got something." Rachel's heart pounded as she rushed over, nearly stumbling in her haste. There, fluttering in the wind, was Emmy's blue blanket, unmistakable, and beneath it, tiny tracks leading west. Rachel radioed in, her voice strong for the first time in hours. "We've got a fresh trail. Move in. She's alive." As the sun climbed higher, the team doubled their pace. Rachel pushed her exhausted people harder, unwilling to let hope slip away now. Brandon, pale and wild-eyed, scanned the snow, murmuring his daughter's name like a prayer. In the shelter of the blind, Emmy and Max found a moment of peace. Emmy, weak but alive, leaned into Max, drawing strength from his warmth, his devotion, and the quiet promise that she was not alone. The nightmare was not over. Danger still lingered, cold, hunger, the wild things that prowled these woods, but the world was moving again, hope returning with the light. And far off, among the trees and swirling snow, the voices of searchers grew louder, echoing through the forest, calling a little girl home. The morning sun crept over the Colorado peaks, painting the snow in hues of gold and blue. After the blizzard's cruel silence, the forest felt alive again, crisp, cold, and filled with the cautious hope of rescue. In the battered hunter's blind, Emmy stirred against Max's side, her fever having broken but her body weak and shivering. She whimpered, eyes fluttering open, lips cracked, and voice no more than a ghost's whisper. "Doggy, where's Mama?" Max watched her, his eyes deep pools of worry and devotion. He licked Emmy's fingers, nudging her gently. She tried to smile, but her hunger and exhaustion made even that a struggle. Outside, the world was blinding white, the snow now sparkling under a new sun. Somewhere in the distance, the sharp buzz of snowmobiles echoed, growing closer with each pass. But Max knew Emmy could not wait much longer. He could smell the sickness in her sweat, feel the weakness in her grip. If they stayed in this place, Emmy's spark would flicker out, quiet and unnoticed, lost to the cold. Max's instincts screamed for action. He rose stiffly, pain shooting through his wounded leg, and nudged Emmy's shoulder, urging her to move. Emmy didn't want to get up. She wanted only to sleep, to disappear into the comfort of dreams. But Max persisted, licking her face, pushing his big head under her arm until finally she clung to his fur and dragged herself upright. With every ounce of energy, Emmy staggered after him, feet numb in soaked boots, blue blanket dragging in the snow. She blinked away tears as Max led her from the blind, his limp more pronounced but his determination unwavering. The cold bit deep, but Max pressed forward, ears pricked for any sign of danger or hope. He steered Emmy downhill, following the faint sound of running water. The river, he remembered from years as a rescue dog, was a lifeline, often followed by hikers and searchers alike. If they could reach it, someone might find them. Emmy stumbled behind Max, her body shaking uncontrollably. She whimpered every few steps, but the sight of the dog, his sturdy frame, the gentle look in his eyes, kept her moving. She trusted him completely, as if he were her only tether to the world. The sun climbed higher, melting some of the frost from the branches and filling the woods with a blinding, hopeful light. But danger had not yet passed. In the hush between breaths, Max caught a scent, sharp, wild, unmistakable. His hackles rose and he turned to scan the tree line. Emmy felt him tense and froze as well, her tiny hands bunching in his fur. There, barely visible against the snow, a mountain lion crept through the shadows. Its golden eyes locked on Emmy, its body low and sinuous, muscles rippling beneath its tawny coat. Hunger and curiosity mingled in its gaze. Max stepped between Emmy and the cat, teeth bared, every instinct screaming that this was no ordinary test. He barked, a deep, ferocious sound that echoed through the silent trees. The mountain lion hissed, circling, tail lashing. Emmy whimpered, pressing herself into Max's side. The cat was too close. So close she could see the steam of its breath, hear the low rumble in its throat. Max stood his ground, growling louder, refusing to let Emmy out of his sight. Blood from his old wound oozed into the snow, but he didn't flinch. Suddenly, the lion pounced, fast and silent as lightning, claws slashing through the air. Max lunged to meet it, barking wildly. The two animals collided, rolling in the snow, a blur of fur and teeth. Emmy screamed, her fear shattering the stillness. Max clamped his jaws on the lion's leg, refusing to let go. The lion yowled, twisting free, then swiped Max's shoulder with a powerful blow. Max staggered but did not retreat. He barked again, louder than ever, the sound booming across the forest. The mountain lion hesitated, torn between hunger and self-preservation. At that moment, the distant voices of searchers pierced the trees, shouts and the engine roar of snowmobiles. The lion's ears flicked. Another shout, closer this time. "Emmy! Emmy! Where are you?" The mountain lion bolted, vanishing into the underbrush, leaving only the sound of retreating paws and a cloud of snow in its wake. Max stumbled back to Emmy, sides heaving, blood trickling down his leg and shoulder. He dropped to his haunches, utterly spent. Emmy sobbed, crawling to Max and wrapping her arms around his battered neck. "Good doggy. Don't go." She buried her face in his fur, her tears hot against the cold. Max leaned into her, accepting her embrace, though every muscle trembled with exhaustion and pain. The world seemed to pause for a breath, and then the snowmobiles broke through the brush. Orange jackets, radios, and snowshoes, searchers in a flurry of urgent movement. There they are," a woman's voice, Deputy Bennett's, rang clear and strong. Rachel ran toward them, her heart bursting with relief and disbelief. Max lifted his head at the commotion, ears drooping, vision blurry. Emmy clung to him, refusing to let go even as the rescuers knelt beside her, wrapping her in a warm blanket and gently prying her arms away. Rachel knelt next to Max, her hand shaking as she stroked his head. "You're a good boy," she murmured. "You're the bravest dog I've ever seen." Medics swarmed around Emmy, checking her vitals, whispering reassurances as they tucked her into a thermal wrap. Rachel radioed in, her voice choked with emotion. "We have her. She's alive. I repeat, we have the girl. Max lay in the snow, Emmy's tears soaking his fur, as relief finally overtook fear. His job wasn't done, not yet. But for this moment, as the searchers cheered and wept, and the sun burned away the last of the blizzard's shadow, he let himself rest, surrounded by the warmth of rescue and the arms of the child he had saved. The forest exploded with urgent movement as the searchers closed in, snow spraying beneath boots and snowshoes, radios crackling in a flurry of overlapping voices. For Deputy Rachel Bennett, every stride felt like a sprint through her own memories. Fear, hope, and that wild, electric relief of a rescue not yet complete. She pushed past the medics, blinking away tears. "Emmy!" she called, breath fogging in the cold air. The little girl looked up from where she huddled beside Max, her blue blanket tangled around her shoulders, eyes huge and shining with tears and exhaustion. Rachel dropped to her knees, scooping Emmy into her arms. For one heart-stopping second, Emmy was limp, nearly weightless. Then she clung to Rachel's neck, sobbing into her shoulder, hands grasping tight. "You're safe now, sweetheart," Rachel whispered, voice trembling. "You're safe, I promise." She pressed her cheek to Emmy's tangled hair, letting the moment fill her up. Relief, gratitude, the fierce ache of knowing a life had been pulled back from the edge. The medics moved in, wrapping Emmy in an emergency blanket, checking her pulse and temperature. Her skin was frighteningly cold, her lips a shade too blue. "She's hypothermic, but stable. We need to get her to the hospital now," one medic said, urgency threading every word. But Emmy, barely awake, only reached for Max, her voice hoarse and desperate. "Doggy! Don't leave Doggy!" Max lay sprawled on the snow, every breath a struggle. Blood matted his fur, his eyes half-lidded but tracking Emmy as the commotion swirled around them. For a moment, Rachel thought he was gone, just a shell of the battered stray that had saved a life. But then his tail flicked, slow and determined, and Rachel let out a shaky laugh. "He's coming too," she told the medics. "He's not done yet." A vet technician, called in as soon as paw prints were found, hurried forward with a stretcher. They bundled Max as carefully as Emmy, slipping an oxygen mask over his snout. Emmy's cries quieted only when she saw that Max would ride with her, both of them swaddled in warmth, side by side in the back of the snowmobile sled. Rachel rode behind, gripping the rails, whispering prayers as they raced through the forest, sunlight breaking in sharp spears through the trees. At the hospital, bright lights and frantic hands took over. Emmy was rushed into the ER, her tiny body hooked to IVs, her vitals monitored by a team that moved with practiced urgency. Doctors pressed warm packs to her feet and hands, slowly coaxing color back into her cheeks. All the while, she asked for Max. "Doggy, where's Doggy?" she mumbled, feverish as the nurses adjusted her blankets. "He saved me. Please don't let him go." In the animal hospital next door, Max lay on a padded table, his body trembling as vets cleaned his wounds. The coyote bites and mountain lion gash were deep, but not mortal. "Old boy's tough," one vet said, stroking his head. "He's got the heart of a champion." Max whimpered as they stitched his flank, his eyes glazed and tired. But when someone showed him Emmy's blue blanket, his ears twitched and his tail thumped weakly. He wasn't leaving her, not if he had a choice. News of the rescue swept through the town like wildfire. Reporters gathered outside the hospital, cameras ready, voices hushed in awe. Social media exploded with photos, a grainy shot of Max standing over Emmy, the blue blanket around them both, and the image of Rachel carrying Emmy from the snow, face streaked with relief and exhaustion. Inside, Rachel sat by Emmy's hospital bed, holding her hand as doctors explained. She's very lucky. That dog kept her alive with body heat. Without him, she never would have made it through the night. Brandon, Emmy's father, was ushered in, his face gaunt, red-eyed, barely able to stand. He dropped to his knees beside the bed, sobbing, begging for forgiveness. "I'm so sorry, Em. I'm so sorry." Emmy's hand reached for his, small and unsteady, her eyes searching his. "You came back," she whispered. "It's okay, Daddy." Rachel watched, heart aching, as Brandon promised to do whatever it took to make things right. Later, she sat with him in the waiting room, offering quiet, blunt compassion. "You have a long road ahead," she told him. "But today you get a second chance. Don't waste it." Brandon nodded, wiping his eyes. "I won't, I swear." Meanwhile, Emmy slept, her dreams full of fur and warmth, the steady heartbeat that had kept her alive. Nurses brought Max in, his body bandaged but his spirit intact. Emmy's face lit up, her arms opening wide. "Doggy!" she squealed, and Max limped over, collapsing at her side, head on her lap. The hospital staff looked on, some crying, some smiling, all moved by the impossible story of a child and her guardian. Days passed. Emmy grew stronger, color returning to her cheeks, her laughter ringing down the halls. She told everyone who would listen about her hero dog, and the doctors agreed. Max's presence had been the miracle that kept her alive. He became a local celebrity, a symbol of hope and resilience. His photo splashed across newspapers and television. Brandon, still fragile, was offered help, a place in a support group, therapy, and supervised visits with Emmy. Rachel, trusting her instincts, gave him that chance, vowing to watch closely but rooting for redemption. She knew healing took time for both parents and children, and that every family deserved hope. The town held a small celebration at the hospital, a crowd gathering to cheer as Emmy and Max reunited in the courtyard, the dog's limp barely noticeable as he trotted to her side. Rachel stood in the back, hands tucked into her jacket, feeling, for the first time in years, something like peace. The story wasn't over, but for that one bright afternoon, as Emmy buried her face in Max's neck and the town cheered, it felt like a happy ending. A lost child, a forgotten dog, and a second chance for everyone who had almost given up on miracles. As winter melted into spring, the story of Emmy and Max echoed far beyond the Colorado mountains. Newspapers and TV anchors told it as a miracle, a tale of courage and loyalty in a world that sometimes felt cold and indifferent. But for those who had lived it, the true lessons lingered not in headlines, but in quiet moments, in hearts forever changed. At first, the hospital was a whirlwind. Cards and flowers poured in, news crews crowding the entrance, everyone eager for a glimpse of the little girl and her unlikely guardian. But inside Emmy's room, life slowed to the gentle rhythm of recovery. She spent her days drawing pictures, Max as a superhero, herself bundled in a blue blanket, the woods transformed into a fairy tale. Nurses taped her artwork on the walls, brightening every corner. Max visited her every morning, limping but proud, his presence as healing as any medicine. Deputy Rachel Bennett became a frequent visitor, always in uniform, but quick to trade her badge for crayons and coloring books. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the window and painted golden patches on the floor, Rachel found herself telling Emmy stories of other rescues, some successful, some not. "You're braver than most grown-ups I know," she said, tucking a loose curl behind Emmy's ear. "You never gave up, not even when things got scary." Emmy smiled shyly, her gaze flicking to Max, who wagged his tail as if he understood every word. The town rallied around them in ways big and small. Donations flooded local shelters. Families lined up to adopt forgotten animals. and Max became the mascot for the rescue dog program. Rachel, who had seen too much heartbreak in her years of service, felt hope blooming in her own life. She started volunteering with the animal shelter, bringing Max along to visit schools and hospitals, where he soothed frightened children with his calm, steady presence. But not every moment was joyful. There were nights when Emmy woke crying, tangled in sheets, her dreams haunted by darkness and hunger and wild animal eyes. Brandon, her father, sat by her side through each one, holding her hand, murmuring apologies and promises. He'd been given a second chance, but trust was something he had to earn day by day. Rachel helped him navigate the complicated world of therapy and supervised visits, always watching, always rooting for redemption, but never letting down her guard. One evening, the town hall overflowed with neighbors and strangers alike, all gathered to celebrate Emmy and Max's return. The mayor handed out medals, but Rachel's speech was what everyone remembered. She stood at the podium, voice steady, eyes shining, her words a thread that stitched the community together. We're here today not just because a child was found or a dog became a hero, but because we remembered who we are when things are hard. This wasn't luck. It was the result of dozens, hundreds of people refusing to give up. It was about community and compassion and our duty to care for the most vulnerable among us. Emmy's story reminds us that anyone, no matter how small or forgotten, matters. That the bravest among us might walk on four legs or speak in a whisper. That hope, even when it feels impossible, is always worth fighting for. The room erupted in applause, tears and cheers mingling as Rachel stepped down, Max wagging at her side. For a long moment, the town felt united in purpose, pride, and gratitude, each person carrying a piece of the story forward. As Emmy's story spread, families who had lost children to the wilderness reached out, letters and emails, calls in the middle of the night. They spoke of closure and comfort, of how Emmy's survival gave them hope that somewhere, in another life, their loved ones had found peace. Some even came to visit, leaving tokens at the trailhead where searchers had first found Emmy's mitten, a faded teddy bear, a blue hair ribbon, a prayer written on a scrap of notebook paper, tucked into a tree's hollow. Emmy's tale went viral, inspiring donations to rescue animal programs and support for foster children. People from across the country sent blankets, stuffed animals, and hand-knit scarves, each one a small act of kindness, a pledge to do better. At the hospital, Max began working as a therapy dog alongside Rachel, visiting traumatized kids and showing them that healing, while slow, was always possible. One afternoon, Emmy sat in a sunlit playroom surrounded by other children, some sick, some lonely, all a little bit braver after meeting Max. She watched as a shy boy edged closer, reaching out to pat Max's head. "He's not scary," Emmy whispered, encouraging him. "He saved me." The boy smiled, his shoulders relaxing, and for the first time since his own accident, he laughed. Rachel watched this from the doorway, her heart full. She knew the world was still broken in places, that not every story ended in a miracle. But Emmy and Max had become proof that even in the darkest winter, warmth could be found, and that survival was built on love, loyalty, and a community that refused to look away. Brandon, still working on himself, started volunteering at the animal shelter, using his story to help other parents battling addiction. He spoke honestly about his failures, his regrets, and the power of forgiveness. In time, he became a local advocate for mental health and parental support, determined to make sure no one else fell as far or felt as alone. As spring painted the mountains in green and gold, Emmy, Max, and Rachel took long walks through the woods. Emmy carried her blue blanket, but she didn't cling to it anymore. Max trotted beside her, limping but proud, his eyes bright with purpose. Rachel, walking just a step behind, knew that while not every scar was visible, healing was underway. And so, the story of a lost child and a forgotten dog became a lesson etched in snow and memory, a reminder that sometimes the smallest among us teach the greatest lessons. That survival is not just luck, but the fierce, determined work of hearts refusing to surrender. And that hope, once kindled, can warm an entire town. 6 months slipped by, and with the thawing of snow came a gentle transformation over the mountains and the little town that had once held its collective breath for a missing girl. Spring bled into summer, and everything seemed softer. Trees flush with green, wildflowers bursting between rocks, laughter floating on warm breezes from the schoolyard and park. Yet for those whose lives had been caught in that cold and desperate winter, the change was something deeper, quieter, as if the whole world had slowed to let healing take root. Emmy's life had blossomed in ways no one could have predicted during those harrowing nights. She now lived in a stable foster home, a cozy yellow house on a street lined with lilac bushes and porch swings. Her foster parents, Marcia and David, were gentle people who believed in second chances. They didn't try to erase Emmy's memories or rush her to forget the pain, but instead built their days around routine and warmth. Breakfasts of pancakes and fresh berries, bedtime stories, trips to the local pool. Emmy's nightmares faded, little by little, replaced by dreams filled with sunlight and the quiet snuffles of a dog beside her bed. Max had become more than just a dog. He was family, a constant in the shifting landscape of Emmy's young life. His limp grew more pronounced as the months wore on, but his spirit never faded. He would wait for Emmy every afternoon at the edge of the playground, tail sweeping the grass as she ran toward him, backpack bouncing. Children from all over the neighborhood gathered to pet him, to hear again how he had saved Emmy's life. But for Emmy, Max was never a hero. He was her anchor, her comfort, her proof that no one was ever truly alone. Deputy Rachel Bennett formally adopted Max after a vote by the town council, who declared him an official resident and gave him a shiny collar with his name on it. He spent weekdays with Rachel at the sheriff's department, where he napped beneath her desk or rode along in the back of her cruiser, always ready for another adventure. Rachel found herself changed too, less guarded, more open to laughter and the possibility of good things. She and Emmy visited the animal shelter every Saturday, helping walk the dogs, offering encouragement to nervous families considering adoption. Max always led the way, nudging Rachel's hand with his nose as if to remind her that there was always one more heart to mend. Brandon, Emmy's father, continued his journey through therapy and recovery. The guilt that had once hollowed him out was still there, but it no longer defined him. Each week he met with his counselor and sat in a circle with other parents, sharing hard truths and quiet victories. He wasn't reunited with Emmy, but he saw her regularly under the careful eye of her foster parents and Rachel. The visits started short and supervised, Emmy hesitant at first, but soon she looked forward to his stories, about his work at the animal shelter, about the first time he held her as a baby, about the hope he still carried that one day he could be the father she deserved. On the day of the annual community picnic, the entire town gathered at the big park overlooking the river. Families grilled burgers, children raced through sprinklers, and musicians played old country songs beneath a canvas tent. Rachel arrived early with Max, settling him on a blanket beneath the shade of a maple tree. Emmy came running as soon as she spotted them, her face shining, hair pulled back with a new blue ribbon. Marcia and David smiled from the sidelines, arms full of lemonade and plates stacked high with cookies. As the sun dipped low, Emmy, Max, Rachel, and Emmy's foster siblings formed a circle, tossing a frisbee across the lawn. Max, slow but determined, chased it every time, barking with joy as the children cheered him on. Laughter mingled with the evening breeze, and for a while it felt as if the shadows of winter had finally retreated for good. Later, the town mayor took the microphone, her voice warm and steady. Today isn't just about celebrating survival. It's about celebrating family, the kind we're born into and the kind we choose. Emmy and Max reminded us that courage comes in all shapes and sizes, and that love is what makes us whole. Let's remember their story every time we reach out to help someone lost, every time we choose kindness over judgment. As twilight deepened, Rachel walked beside Emmy and Max down a quiet path beside the river. Emmy clutched her blue blanket, but her steps were confident, her eyes bright. She turned to Rachel, voice soft. "Do you think Max knows how much I love him?" Rachel smiled, kneeling to wrap an arm around them both. "I think he's always known, Emmy. Just like you always knew he'd never leave you behind." Farther down the path, Brandon waited, holding a bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked on the hike over. He knelt as Emmy approached, handing her the bouquet, his voice unsteady but full of hope. "I'm proud of you, Em, and I'll always be here, even when I'm not right beside you." Emmy hugged him tight, the hurt of the past not gone, but softened, woven into something new. The sun set in a blaze of pink and gold, shadows stretching long over the grass. Rachel, Emmy, Max, and the family walked home together, laughter trailing behind them, the night full of promise. The final lesson was simple, etched not just in snow, but in every heart. True heroism is measured by the courage to love and protect the weakest among us. And sometimes, family finds you when you're most lost. As darkness settled, Emmy, Max, and Rachel paused on the crest of the hill, the town below glowing with porch lights and warmth. They stood quietly for a moment. 3 souls forever changed, living proof that even broken stories can end with hope. And somewhere in the gathering night, a girl's laughter rang out, strong and clear, promising that no matter how hard the journey, love would always light the way home.